Hey, I hope everyone's doing well. It's been quite a long time since I've had time to do a knife video, and I just wanted to get one and talk about this small Sebenza 31 model that I just acquired, which is a fantastic knife. I've taken the pocket clip off. I don't like pocket clips. That's not how I'm carrying it. But the reason I want to do the video is because every time I've had a small one before, I've ended up selling it and not really using it. And part of the reason I think is it's very small in my large hand. I'll just zoom the camera out. It's actually quite a tiny knife for my hand size, even though from an EDC perspective, this is actually a really fantastic size. It's ideal. I don't have my large Sebenza here. That's in New Zealand, and I'm currently in the Philippines. But the large Sebenza for me is an almost perfect knife. It's quite a heavy knife, solid titanium and everything, but it's a perfect size knife for a versatile do-it-all folder. I just love it. And with my hand size and my long fingers and things on the large, because the large is significantly bigger than this, I found opening and closing it really easy, not a problem. Really smooth and a very light action on the detent. And I don't like flipping knives and things. One of the things I like about the Reeve knife has always been the fact that it's just a smooth, slow opening action that's enjoyable with good tolerances. But I've always noticed the small ones are a lot stiffer and harder to open. And then combined with that, with my hand size, it's actually really hard to get a grip and open it and get my thumb in and get the right angle, because while you're trying to do this, you can be putting pressure on the back here and locking it in even harder. And after a day, my thumb is already in extreme pain from trying to contort and open this, and I'm pushing as hard as I can and it won't open. And then I try and get in here and I'm pushing hard as I can, it won't open, because you've got to get it in just the right spot. And you end up doing funny, weird things where it's just compressing down my thumb. You can see it squishing it. And I just struggle to open it. And then I watch a lot of other people who just open and close this without an issue, who have a much smaller hand. And it's interesting, I was just watching a video by another YouTuber. I'm not sure his channel name. I've never watched him before. Random video. I'll link it if I can find it. But he was just bought his first Reeve knife, and he was also having trouble with stiffness, other issues, and struggling to open it because he had the big knife with a smaller hand. But he found a technique, which maybe I do it on the big one, I'm not sure. But he said if you put your index finger on the side here and lock the blade in like that, your thumb goes into the natural position to pop it open. It's not stopping anything. And my God, he's right. It just pops open every time. You put your index finger there and it puts your thumb in the exact position and angle where that comes out without much resistance. And pain problem solved. As soon as my thumb heals from the existing pain, it won't be a problem anymore. And this knife, I mean, when I did my own frame locks, I molded it off a Sebenza to a certain degree, not copying the design, but copying the simplicity of the mechanics and things. And a convex blade, of course, but I've just always liked the handle shape, the profile, and the blade profile of a Sebenza. And I don't know, it's just the simplicity is the art in this thing. It's just an ingenious quality knife. And I was watching another channel, Archman. Archman's got a great channel if you like Sebenzas and things. It's just smooth, steady, chat, easy to listen to, and he has a lot of good commentary on these knives from someone who actually uses them. And one of the issues, of course, is that a lot of people getting these 31s, if you've been used to the 21s, they feel like the tolerances or the quality is dropped potentially. And I thought that too in some ways, but after doing a lot of careful consideration today and really examining this, I feel like it's not that the quality has dropped at all. The quality is all there. It's just that there's subtle changes that are not really mentioned to the consumer who may be used to a expectation from a Sebenza. And of course, for all the new customers out there buying a Sebenza, if this is what they get first, that they'll never know about what the 21 was and they might not care. But to relay my impression of what the Sebenza 21 was, the whole idea of it is just this knife that has 3 simple screws to remove. You take out the pivot, backspacer and stop pin, those 3 bits, and it just comes apart. You've got a bushing in there, and it's so simple and easy to clean and maintain. But one of the key attributes was the idea that the tolerances are so tight on a Sebenza 21, and with the use of the bushing pin, that you can just tighten everything down as tight as it goes, and it's perfect. With that tension, you'll get a free floating blade that moves with a smooth hydraulic feel. People will say, we're talking about, it's just a nice smooth action with no blade play, etc., etc. Whereas, with a lot of cheaper folders in that, it'll either be too tight or it'll be smooth, but the blade will have blade play and be floppy. And the Sebenza's tolerances just let that be perfect. And you just tighten it all down, no worries about having to do a little half turn back or put some Loctite in, etc. And then these new 21s, they made some modifications which have changed that a little bit. And one of the main changes that seems to have affected these things is that the stop pin here used to be a pivot just like this one, that the stop pin here was effectively a bushing just like the bushing that was in here, and it was made of 303 steel and it wasn't that hard. And CRK have always had a policy of flipping voids warranty. This knife is not a flipper, you're not supposed to flip it. There's certain mechanical features of titanium against steel, and if you are opening it like this and just using it as a knife, it'll last forever. But if you're flipping and whacking it, then you're going to put wear and load on these parts. And of course, in the last 10 years or so, more and more people are building folding flipper frame locks that are designed to be flipped open fast. They've put hardened steel in here and things to compensate and deal with that. And so people buying these were having a similar expectation. They wanted to flip them. I'd suspect that a lot of that is just about because they're buying it to play with it. They're not buying it as a knife to use. It's the enjoyment of just flicking it and playing with it and having it like a fidget toy. Because, I've used my Sebenza 21 hard and a lot for 10 years with not even the tiniest dent in there, because when I use it, that's how I open it, and no flipping. But that's by the by. I mean, they decided that they'd go for this 416 hardened stop pin now, which will deal with a bit more impact force and handle that a bit better for people that are doing that. But it's changed the design of the Sebenza now. We still have the backspacer, but this is no longer a free-floating bushing with a pin that goes through, where all the tolerances can be machined the same. It's a solid pin with a shoulder, and those shoulders go into each side, and then these screws are... Actually, the screws aren't even necessary. They're there to stop dirt going through it. But with this tied down and that tied down, that's effectively a captured stop pin. It can't go anywhere. Just like this pivot pin, which I don't have the cloth in there anymore, but it's got shoulders and it's not going anywhere. But this is where the problems have arisen, because people get them, they've been tightened down, and you can barely open them. They're super stiff, and not that smooth feel out of the box. And this was the same. It was too tight, lots of problems with it, and pulled it apart, oiled it, put it back together. One of the issues I found was, these are sandblasted, so immediately when I opened it and you've got the new washers with the holes in them, all that sandblasted material is collected in the grease, leaving it slightly crunchy and everything. So even if you don't want to do what I've done with this one I took Scotch-Brite and I've cleaned it all down to remove all that sandblasting excess. And I've done it on the inside as well so that you don't have that collecting on the grease. But again, I cleaned it, finished it, put it back together, tightened everything, and I couldn't even open the blade. It was so tight. And what I realized through inspection is that this new shoulder pin can't, as tight as the tolerances are, it's not the same as the bushing, and it's not the same as this. And when you tighten that down, it's actually clamping the pivot. So that tightened right down, clamps the pivot, doesn't work properly. And so to experiment with that, I realized that if I just take all these screws out and I take that screw out but leave the pin in there, so that the only thing holding this entire knife together is the screw through the backspacer, it's actually been built so well that this whole thing will stay together. Nothing's going to flex through here, because even the tolerances of that pivot pin going through there without a screw are so tight that I can open and close and use this knife with no side-to-side blade play at all that you'd notice without any screws in. And it opened and closed fairly smoothly. So what it told me was that these screws here are not supposed to be tightened down all the way. In fact, they've started supplying a small bottle of Loctite in here. There never used to be Loctite in Sebenzas because the idea was to just tighten them down, and the screws would form a mechanical connection with the titanium that would hold them rigid. So the answer is, don't tighten the stop pin down ever. It flexes and clamps on here. So you put a little bit of Loctite in so that vibrations, if you're on motorbikes or anything like that, won't loosen the screws, but it's effectively a free-floating stop pin held in by the shoulders, and those are just there to make it look the same and easy to dismantle. So once I did that, I then tested, why is it still so stiff? Why is it so stiff compared to my large one? And the answer completely comes down to the fact that the frame lock has probably been milled the same way as the large one, but it's a much shorter bar. So that means that it's a much tighter spring than the large one. And this new ceramic ball that they're using seems to have more friction maybe as well than the old smaller detent ball, possibly, that used to be in there. And so what's happening is, feels very stiff. Let me zoom out again so you can see this a little bit better. You can see how stiff that is. It's moving because the handle is heavy, but if I hold the handle, the blade's not going anywhere. And so the question is, well, is that because the bushing is the wrong size? You can't tighten down the bushing. So on this one I tested it, I left this completely loose, and I tightened this all the way down, and to test it, you've basically got to remove all tension from the lock bar. You have to push that away so that there's no contact at all. And when I did that, I found that it would move like this fairly smoothly, but it wouldn't move on its own. So I tightened it down and just took the tiniest loosening off. And what you'll see if I press this lock face away is that it actually has a perfect fit. This is tightened all the way down and then just barest fraction eased off. There's no blade play, and it's extremely smooth. All of the tension is because this is a super stiff lock face on the small, much stiffer than the large ones. And essentially that's where all the stiffness is coming from. And it's lighter on the large one feels smoother because you've got the same tension here but a much longer arm, which means that it's a lighter spring. And I don't recommend anyone do this if they don't know what they're doing, but obviously if you push this and over push it, you can lighten the spring a bit. If you do it too far because you're not sure what you're doing, or you just put too much power in because it's tight and overbearing it, you might damage it effectively. You'll make it too light where you won't even get lock up properly anymore. So I caution no one to do that, but it certainly shows the explanation of why the small one is so much stiffer than the large. But again, my main concern was not how stiff this is. That's fine for me. It was the trouble I was having because of all that stiffness opening the thing, and that's all been solved by holding it like that and getting the right action. So the fact that I can take all of these unscrew, and it all still works great, just really does show that the tolerances are still quite amazing. In this, it's just a little bit different, and the difference is that shouldered stop pin, which, because it's shouldered, when you're sanding these down and making them all match, you simply can't make that match exactly because it's got shoulders. There's no way to finely hand sand it down the way they do when they fit the washers and the bushing in and lap everything perfectly. And so, yeah, when tightening that down, it's obviously taking these two, and we're only talking about like 1/1000th of an inch compression, but because everything's so perfect in here, that tiny 1/1000th is enough to compress things here and stop it working. Overall though, yeah, I love the knife. It's just such an impressive quality knife, and I really like it. Quite happy with it. I wasn't even planning to buy it. A friend bought it, decided he preferred a plain one, so I got this off him. But to me, it's the ideal EDC knife. This one's S45VN. I don't care if it's S35, S45, S whatever. They're all good. But definitely it's came really sharp, and it's not a fake sharp. I cut through some cardboard and it's still shaving sharp. Sometimes if it's sharp but had edge damage, cutting up a few boxes would dull it straight away. So they've done a really good job on the sharpening. So that's quite a long video, but it needed the thorough explanation, so there it is.